Welcome to Wednesday Q&A. I am joined by my darling, amazing, vivacious co-host, Kristen Williams, physical therapist, senior lit teacher, and amazing friend. Yay.
Hi, Laura. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, as always, for that beautiful introduction. Let's get
Words
going.
cannot express how much I love you.
Ah,
All right,
likewise.
going right into this is a question from Erin Gray, Grace Yoga. Why do so many people hate dolphin pose?
Yes, it's hard.
I know, she's so cute. So Erin is the teacher. She has a studio in Charleston, South Carolina. Make sure you check it out. It's called Grace Studios, spelled Grayce, a little play off of her last name. And I'm sure she was one that hated dolphin. So dolphin, if for those of you who don't know what dolphin is, it's essentially down dog on your forearms. And we do it in all of our lit classes. I do it with beginners. I pretty much have anybody try it. It doesn't mean that, just like any pose or any ambition you have, you're not going to necessarily get it the way you want it to be or in its fullest expression capability right away. And that's okay. It is challenging. And that is because number one, most people are weak in their upper extremities where they're dangling around all day. Yeah, we grab stuff, we carry stuff, but that's using, some of our arm muscles. And a lot of times people aren't using the connection of the arm via the scapula into the back. Those are your scapula muscles. Those are your shoulder stabilizers. They are also what we consider part of the core musculature, because when we talk about muscles, we talk about them because of origin insertion, but we always have to look at their neighbors, where they connect, what they do. And every set of muscles have many roles. Sometimes they're moving, sometimes they're stabilizing in a strength form, sometimes they're stabilizing in a dynamic form with movement. So the scapula stabilizers do that. When your arm is moving without putting load on it, they help to move it well, the scapula moving on the back. But to get that good scapular stability, we need to actually put load on them. And the load is through the ground and your body weight. So the first reason would be, I think people are not used to the demand it has on your shoulders. But the second reason, which also kind of is part of the first reason, is it is a big opener for your back fascial line. Think of putting on your feety pajamas from the bottom of your feet, all the way up your leg, all the way up your back, all the way to the neck and across your skull. That is getting stretched because you're creating an inverted, you're creating a triangle essentially. And so that peak of the triangle is your pelvis, and everything on either side of it is getting pulled like a little tent, right? There's no wrinkles in the tent. But hey, if your hamstrings are tight, your calves are restricted, your back is restricted, dolphin will feel like beast because it's pulling, and there's not a lot you can do besides bend your knees and come up on your balls of the feet. Even still, it's going to pull because you've taken the length of your arms and shortened. You have a shorter lever. That is going to be more fascial pull. When your arms are out, you get a little bit of a loosening of that fascia because you've got just a longer lever and there's a little wiggle room. But when your forearms are down, that wiggle room is gone. So you could be feeling a lot of stretch that you might not like, but then because of that pull, sometimes it pushes you into your shoulders more because they're not freed up. The shoulder is in almost maximum flexion, a little bit less, but a lot of shoulder range of motion. And then you got to hold them there. And that requires good joint mobility, really pliable fascia that is keeping an evenness. So you're going up into the peak of the pelvis as opposed to down into the shoulders, which loads them even more and makes people really miserable. So can you use and then of course, if you're not integrating your deep core muscles to lift the bowl of the pelvis, it can drop into your shoulders even more. So there's a lot that's going on, and that's why it's such a very lovely and amazing pose. It's one of my favorites. And a lot of people will say they hated dolphin until they loved it, and then they love it. What are your comments?
I mean, everything you said, I was just sitting there nodding my head the whole time. I called Dolphin that it's the truth teller. I mean, it
Mm,
truly, you know, because of that winding up of the soft tissue with the bent elbow, the shorter lever arm, like you're talking about, you take really the strength of the hands and forearms out too. So you are wading into the scapular stabilizer. You've taken the biceps and triceps essentially out. You are you are weight bearing through your shoulder blades, your shoulder girdle, which are weak on almost everybody. I mean, and then yes, people like me who have some soft tissue restrictions have had a long history of it. It's so much better than it used to be, but in the low back, in the lats, um, even shoulder, range of motion restrictions at those end ranges. Um, it's just it highlights those deficits, and I hate to call them deficits because it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me that I can't do that. I will, if I'm working on a forearm balance, I will bring my hands together, still lining my elbows up under my shoulders, but bring my hands together. That just unwinds some of that soft tissue, which allows me to get into a better shoulder flexed position so I can get a better stack. And maybe one day I've played around with the forearms parallel, but I feel that really forces me into less shoulder flexion. So it just feels a little more sketchy, if you will. So, allowing for those modifications can help your clients to feel a little bit better in Dolphin, even though, coming into that forearm parallel can be, again, a better end range mobility check, truth teller. And it is one of those poses that just the more you do it, the more you love it. I love Funky Dolphin because Funky Dolphin now I can open up my chest. And again, it allows me, it's a wider base of support. Funky Dolphin is when you have one arm out to the side with a hand in line with the weight bearing elbow. For those of us who struggle with some of the soft tissue restrictions, it alleviates that. However, you're now it can be more demand on that weight bearing side. And it's really fun to then play around left side, right side. You can again find more truth to be told about your body and where your asymmetries are. And man, it's an endurance, like you said, to get there is one thing, to hold it is a whole other story, because you are putting more weight into the shoulder girdle. It's a little less balanced by way of, you can't put as much in your feet as a lot of people will with down dog. They'll put more of weight in the feet, less in the hands, vice versa. This, because of that shorter, lever arm, you're diving down a little bit further. I love Dolphin. I mean, I put it in the majority of my flows. Depending on my client base, I may or may not start a beginner with it, but I like to try it with them.
mhm.
And then always, always, always give the option. If this doesn't feel good, you can do down dog. You can do a 3-legged dog instead of a 3-legged dolphin, because we want people to feel successful. But, if you really want to build true scapular strength, which we all need, Dolphin is a money shot.
It is. And, I love your suggestions for, just trying some different versions of it that are more suitable for where you are. You can just be on all fours. You could even not even be on the ground and put your interlace your fingers and put your forearms on a table and just let the head release a little bit and just practice pushing the forearms into whatever surface it is, whether it's the ground or a table or a chair, and just start to get that integration of the serratus anterior, which is one of the stabilizing muscles and helps to protract, to give you that broadness across your back. So it is in some ways, it's even, down dog is also, but it really, because of the shortened lever arm, it goes right there. Anytime you shorten a lever arm, that's why we're on the ground on our knees, you go right into your hips. Like there's nothing that's going to get lost in translation. And that's challenging for people, because say you're in down dog and you lift one leg, that same person who could lift one leg in down dog might have a lot of problems in quadruped lifting one leg in a hip extension, because you're going right into the stabilizers when you decrease that lever arm. So you could do just stay with your knees on the ground and forearms down and just practice the approach, the beginning. Can you push your forearms down and get that connection into the scapulostabilizers? Maybe hover the knees a little bit. That's challenging. Um, Ultimately, when you get your pelvis up and you have freedom, it's actually easier than starting low, but that's where you can develop a lot of that strength. Keep at it, even if you feel like you dislike it.
Amen.
Yes. All right. So another question we have is from Kapid Havaya Yoga. Sorry if I botched that. How can I really work on my hyperextended elbows and one knee? Another one is fine. You want to start
Well,
with that?
yeah. Um, a lot of people have hyperextension, and it is easier to go into a hyperextended position because you can settle into the passive structures that will hold you there. I think the biggest challenge for people like you who have hyperextended joints, whether it's the knee or the elbows, is to find a straight position. So it'll feel bent to you, but it's actually straight. And so that's where, Laura, I know you do not like the micro bend talk, because we want a straight joint, but we don't really ever want to lock out. So there's
Yeah, I
a
like to
big,
think soft.
yeah,
Microbend, I've avoided that word because that's such a yoga term. And so people, like, when they hear microbend, they just go too much of a bend. And what we want is that, yeah, stacking of the joint. And that for the hyperextended joint, it will feel like you're just trying to
bent.
soften that connection. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Straight, but soft.
Hmm.
So, working those unnatural positions that are unnatural to you will really build your body's other systems. So you've got the passive restraint, but we also have a lot of active restraints that are probably being underutilized for you. So stretch reflex of your muscles, even the fascia and the skin, but it's that proximal stabilizing musculature that will get challenged for you and will really begin to increase your feedback and your global strength in general, to help you not sink into that. And it's really, really neat as a lit instructor to watch people as they transition out of that sinkiness. And sinkiness is what they're going into their natural hypermobility. When they start to come out of that and they bend, but they soften the joint so they get straight but soft, they're trembling because they're so weak. They've never had to use that active restraint. And then to see over time, they get stronger. They get stronger throughout the body. You can almost see the confidence lift in a way, that because they're doing it actively, and there's joy in that. There's joy in knowing that you are producing strength to stabilize as opposed to ever just hanging out. So, that would be my recommendation, is to really, for you, it's going to feel bent, but you can use, your video on your phone to give you feedback. You can use a mirror in the short term, because you might not be able to feel that yet. So you might need to use a mirror and look to see, I'm actually straight, even though I feel bent, and then just work stability there, single leg work, before you start to move into, or even just double leg stance, double, down dog, etc. Even quadruped, where you're do maybe some serratus puffs while you're in that, not responding through the elbow, but keeping the elbow in that straight position while you move other joints around it. There's a lot of fun you can have to work that stability before you move on to more dynamic poses. What else do you have to say about that, Laura?
Well, this just brings up a cue I've been using a lot more lately, and it really started with private. This is actually, I mean, we've been teaching long enough. We've been physical therapists. There's these cues are always within us, but sometimes we bring them up more because it's like we have so like many people we've seen who need it. So a cue I've been using a lot more, and people have been writing me about it. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't heard you maybe say it in that way." And a lot of it has to do with, I saw it so much with people that I was working privates with, and realizing now like everybody needs it. And that is at the forearms, not spinning them. So I have found with people who are hyper extending in their elbows, um, it is their scapular muscles, their scapular stabilizers aren't performing. So they kind of like sink and then lock out that elbow forward. And like you were saying, look above and below and how you can stabilize. So above would be at the shoulder. Like how are you holding the scapula neutral in quadruped or in plank? And then, because that's usually where it's going to happen when the shoulder is directly over the wrist. You sometimes will see some hyper extension in down dog. That's usually happening from the swivel of the forearms. It's like somebody's just kind of sunk into the elbow and then let the forearm swivel. So what I mean by keeping the rigidity in the forearm is the forearm is composed of two bones, just like our lower leg. But how it's different than our lower leg is those two bones don't swivel. They have to provide the stability of weight bearing as bipedal people. But where we have become different in our primateness and is that we have the ability to manipulate objects. And the way we do that is our ability to swivel our forearm. We can grab something, bring it up to our mouth. You know, that is the swiveling of the forearm that allows that. So we want that. Think of that. You do want that. So there are people who are rigid in here. You need the the movement of the forearm. You want the interosseous, the fascia in between, not to be too rigid. So it's restricted. But you also want it in weight bearing to not swivel, because when you swivel in weight bearing, it will turn the upper forearm and then into the lower humeral side at the elbow. It'll turn it and push it forward. So all the cues about pointing your elbows forward or back, don't even think about that. Think about hold the forearm steady, don't allow it to swivel, and then hold the scapula on the back rib steady. And I bet you'll find that you will be less able to hyperextend. It'll probably still be there because once you've gotten that, loosened those passive restraints by going into hyperextension a lot, you're going to have to, in your brain, think soft elbow. But that would be the other thing I would definitely add is watch the swiveling of the forearm. Watch how you're weight bearing. If you're weight bearing a lot on your pinky side, you're probably swiveling that forearm and locking out the elbow forward. So then that'll lead to wrist stuff. And, so it, like KB said, stabilize below the joint, above the joint, and then just think of that joint stacking in a soft way, not in a locking way that kind of takes you out of especially the proximal side of it. That might have been a lot of biomechanics, but get back to us. Yeah. It really makes a difference. And it doesn't mean you're not going to swivel some. Like somebody's like, oh my gosh, that cue is great, but I find that mine swivels a little bit when I handstand. It's going to. That's like it's gonna, because it's kind of getting a little not as stable, and then you just come back to it. And so it's not a matter of like lock in and never move it, but especially in the places where you also have other things on the ground, like your knees or your feet, you're able to really practice it there. All right. So Lottie Nan asks, I somehow developed groin pain when running. I think it's more of a hip flexor issue. Tips? As a runner, you want to start there?
Yeah.
So why don't you first explain? I'm sure there's lots of our listeners who know what we mean by groin, but I think it is good to just go over, because groin, sometimes you just think like inner thighs.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, she could be describing one of two things, I would guess. We have the pubic area. So our pelvis is basically three bones. We have two bones on the side and one in the back, but where the two bones on the side come together in the front is called your pubic area and your pubic symphysis. So as a female, I think she was a female. She is a female, and running, especially around, let me go back to the groin. So there's sorry, I kind of got off topic there. I was getting ready to discuss, but that can be considered the groin, but it can also be coming down the inside of the leg. That kind of upper inner thigh is synonymous with groin. Those are your adductor muscles. They attach at that pubic bone near the symphysis, and then they come down and they move your legs together. And so when we're running, especially, the foot as it, at heel strike and then going through mid stance to push off, there's this kind of supination or pronation and supination that's occurring. And that's going to go all the way up the chain. So especially in women, we tend to have a wider pelvis than men, which can give us a more of a tendency to drop in at the knees, which can mean there's a lot that's going on, even all the way up at the groin, to control what's happening down at the foot. So if she's an overpronator, is she trying to control that all the way up at the pelvis? Is she running around her period the first couple days or the days leading up, where she's got a lot of hormones that are loosening, making that more lax? Has she had children? Is it already more lax to start? I have found in my own personal running, when I had groin issues, and even with standing, or even it was because my core was weak as well. It really had not much to do at all about what was going on my foot, because I don't wear orthotics. I used to way back in the day. But as my core has gotten stronger, and by core, I mean my abdominals, my glutes, I have to do less controlling of the lower extremities, so that groin is not trying to balance my pelvis as much. It's better balanced because everything else is doing the work. And the reason I know that people overuse their groin muscles, their adductors, is most people are rock hard tight there. Those groin muscles are on almost constant tone, trying to stabilize the pelvis. And then you put running on top of it, where now it is a dynamic, repetitive process that the pelvis wants to try to stay steady, but it has a much harder time if we don't have that core control. So before I would give you, and I know there's the feel good stuff of stretch, massage, I would say, let's look at your core. Let's look at your glutes. Let's look at your glute med and min on the outside. Why is that inner thigh bothering you? Is it a muscle thing? Is it a joint referred pain? If I had to guess, it is something going on in your mechanics, in your pelvis, maybe down at your foot too. But I would guess that you're underperforming in your core, in your abdominals, in your obliques. Your obliques on one side are going to directly affect the adductor, the groin on the opposite side. Is it overworking? Is it underworking? Why is it bothering you? And that can be, as a physical therapist, as kind of as we call ourselves, movement specialists, that's a blast for us to try to figure out, what's going on. I have people send me videos of slow motion running. I'm watching what's happening in mechanics, and then we test their strength. And there really is a story being told by the pain being located in your adductor. What else do you know about that, Laura?
Yeah, well, the fact that she was also mentioning her hip flexors. So I totally agree with everything you're saying. Like, if you are having pain, tightness, whatever, we almost always have to go back to, like you said, you could do the feel good stuff, but most likely you need dynamic stability. So if your pelvis, say, is tipped forward, just imagine a bowl that's tipping forward. The energy load is going forward, right? So your hips are trying to stabilize that pelvis going forward. That would be right at your hip flexors, going down into your groin area. And then you're just, you're running and you need that dynamic stability. I would go right into, like, what is going on inside the bowl of your pelvis? Are your pelvic core muscles strong and adaptable? Is your SI joint, is it, anytime you go into your inner groin, go up and around into your SI joint. Are you tipped and that's getting compressed, but you're just feeling it down in the adductors? Those are really often hand in hand. And if you think about, like, the SI joint as this shock absorption area, the goal in any kind of movement is to return as much of that energy back into the body, but especially in running. People who are very successful at running, meaning they can go fast, they can go long, and they're not getting injured. They are, yes, they might be genetically predisposed, but they're also returning that energy more into their body to go into the movement versus losing that energy, which puts more demand on their body and gets you more tired, you're less efficient, and then you're more prone to these kind of imbalance overuse injuries. So when you're running, I would encourage you to really examine, like, are you holding yourself? And as you go forward, can you move that, land that foot, but feel that energy coming back up and not getting like moved forward, and like the pelvis is just going forward without any of the, so think of upward return of energy, like you're trying, like you're jumping on a trampoline, right? We don't want to jump down and then be like, it's like we want to jump down to go back up. And that's how running is. That's how a lot of our movement is. But my guess would be you really, work on your core stability, work on your hip mobility, work on a neutral pelvis, because my gut would say that your pelvis is tipping forward, which, you're moving forward, but you don't have to tip your pelvis as you're moving forward. I would hinge at the hips and the trunk before I would tip the pelvis, because that means you're probably not using your glutes as well. And you might be overusing your low back and those hip flexors. And they're both trying to move and stabilize you. And that's very hard to do both well. So
Yeah.
pulls on the groin, look at the foot. There's so many things, like KB said. I mean, this is just the opening of the can. But those are the initial thoughts. Like, you probably need to be stabilizing more, even though you're feeling it in the sense of it's sore or tight or whatever. Tightness is usually a sign of weakness. All right,
Love
my
it.
friends. Yeah, we should do a whole running clinic. Well, as always, why don't you send us off, my darling KB?
All right. Well, you know that you can always send us your questions either to our email at support@lityoga.com, or it's very easy to DM us on Instagram. I am KB Williams 99. And you
I
can find
am
Laura
Laura
at,
Hyman. And we love getting your answers. I mean, we love getting your questions and attempting to answer them. As always, we are here giving kind of free advice. So don't ever just take it with a grain of salt. Um, be critical thinkers yourself. So we're just giving the best advice we can based on our years of experience, but let us help you in any way we can. So thank you. And as always, we are pulling for you.
something for you.
Yee!